All right, so I'll give a proper introduction, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Jenna Alexander. I'm the president of the Virginia PTA. I think most all of you that are here today are volunteers in your local PTA or with your local school board, but for anybody that is joining us that is not familiar with PTA, we are the largest and oldest child advocacy association, both in the Commonwealth and in the United States. And for the past 100 years, we've been empowering families and parents with knowledge, tools, and resources to engage in their child's education. We are the largest provider of parent support groups in the Commonwealth, supporting more than 900 of our schools with leadership training, family engagement toolkits, grants, student recognition programs, advocacy opportunities, and what we're doing here tonight is parent educational resources. So I'm delighted to have you here with us tonight. I want to turn it over to Superintendent Coons, and we're going to walk through some information that you can hopefully use to help you in working with your students and with your school communities.
Yeah, we're very excited to be here. Please call me Lisa. It's really exciting to be in Virginia. I think I'm almost to 6 months here in Virginia and have had the opportunity over the past week and a half to be in almost every corner of Virginia. We have our last regional meeting with superintendents and with our instructional leads tomorrow in Tappahannock. So very excited about that. I want to introduce my colleague, Melissa Rickey. She is standing up our Office of Parent Engagement, which is a separate office in the Virginia Department of Education underneath my office that supports families and does a lot of the similar things to what Jenna talked about, but it's a great opportunity to have that resource inside the agency as well and expand opportunities for families. So really excited to be here. Really excited to hear and listen to families and happy to answer questions and happy to talk about some of the initiatives going on at the Department of Education and how we partner together to make sure every child in the Commonwealth feels supported by their families and their teachers.
All right, I wonder, shall I start us off with a quick question here? I'll give us a place to start. So let me let this person in. The current accountability and accreditation system for our school system is based on a pretty simple traffic light model with 3 levels. And the Board of Education has been talking about making some changes using a somewhat more complicated model with 5 levels. I wonder if you could speak a little bit to the work that you've been undertaking in doing that research, why you think that 5 levels is going to be better than 3 levels, and the types of things that you would expect a parent would see in better evaluation for their schools in moving to a new model.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what the 5 and the 3, I know that's the accreditation pieces, but one of the things that we are working on and thinking about is how to make sure the accreditation model tells families, parents, educators, and students where they are, where their school is, and where their school division is. And right now, everything goes into a pot. So everything gets mixed together. So if I have passing rate and if I grew a certain amount, that comes out as a singular rating. And it's really hard to say, are kids growing? Are kids achieving? So a lot of the conversation that we've been having across the Commonwealth is how do we tell those 2 stories separately? And how do you know as parents and as educators, are we growing children? And are they meeting that achievement expectation? So a lot of the conversation that the board has had is around separating growth and achievement. And really, when we talk about growth, all students come in different places. Some students come in under grade level, some students come in above grade level, but how much is that teacher in that school moving that student from where they start to the end of the year? And so there's been a lot of conversation around something called VBOS. All of our families got student profile reports, which was the start of kind of the conversation around growth. That VBOS report and the idea of growth is being reported in 12 different states across the country. It really helps us understand, are kids moving? Are all kids moving? So you can understand if you have a highly gifted student, is that kid moving throughout the school year? If you have a struggling student, is that student moving faster and catching up? And how are students moving? That's the intent of the growth. And think of it as a pie chart. What the board is talking about right now is reporting growth separately instead of mushing it together in one singular kind of stoplight rating, Jenna, as you spoke about before. It's really pulling growth out and talking about growth separately. And I think what you're talking about with the 5 levels is what they've been talking about around achievement. So in achievement, what the board is currently having conversations about is actually thinking about how many students are scoring at the bottom level, how many students are scoring at this benchmark, this benchmark or this benchmark, and weighting those students a little bit differently in an achievement index. The board voted to move forward with an achievement index instead of just a pure achievement level. And what that means is in a pure achievement level, 75% of the kids pass, you get a 75. 90% of the kids pass, you get a 90. That really doesn't tell you the story of how kids are achieving and how kids are making those different bands of achievement. What the board voted to move to public comment is the achievement index, and more of an index where you know how many kids are hitting that most high advanced band, whatever they end up calling that, how many kiddos are proficient, how many kiddos are close to proficient, and then how many kiddos are in that below basic band. And so you can see that by a weighting system. And then there's a third part of the puzzle where they talk about readiness. How are kids getting ready for the next band of grades? So how are elementary kiddos being prepared for middle school? How are middle school kiddos being prepared for high school? And how are our high school kids being prepared for their post-secondary opportunities? Whether that's careers, college, or military, how are we communicating to everybody in the world how students are being ready? Right now in our accountability accreditation system, it's something called a CCCRI measure, and both the educators, the families all think it's calculus. And that's a lot of what our current accreditation, it looks like a whole bunch of things being woven together. The intent is to move to this pie model where you know growth, you know achievement, and you know whether or not the schools are preparing kiddos for the readiness for their next level. And then thinking about that in a placemat so you can see all three of those things, but also have an overall measure that says this is how a school is doing. So it tells a complete picture, but each portion of the picture is clear and is easily understood by all of us and not some kind of calculus formula in the background. So that is where the board voted last week. It's been a long week, sorry. Last week, that's where they voted to move forward. And so they have started the regulatory process. Those regulations were filed and moved through the governor's office over the past week. Those were filed with the regulatory board. Those sit for 30 days. And then we move into 3 levels of stakeholder engagement, which is really exciting to me because now people can start to shape those buckets, talk about the index, what you want to see, what you not want to see, talk about growth, what kinds of things you want to communicate. And it's an opportunity for the public to be engaged, give feedback to the board as they start to shape this over the next year. And that regulatory process starts now, but it will take 12 months before they finalize that regulation and then move forward with a new system.
And so we've recently rolled out, actually, does anybody, I want to just encourage everybody, if you have questions, please do put them in the chat. You know, we didn't pre-practice and prepare a tidy set of things here. So really, if you have questions, please do share them in the chat. So recently, the Board of Education approved new history standards. We've got new math standards that have been implemented. We're going after the changes to the Virginia Literacy Act. So I was wondering if you can break down each of those for us and talk a little bit about, you know, how are we moving forward in the Virginia Literacy Act? Where are going to be those opportunities that parents should be able to see the changes that are being made to the curriculum in the classroom? A lot of our PTAs are often asked to buy books to support that change. So if you could talk a little bit about just the rollout of the Virginia Literacy Act, and then likewise with the new math standards, some of the things that we should expect parents to see in that same kind of space of new curriculum coming in, when the SOLs are going to change, and that whole streamlined process.
Yep. So I think one of the most exciting things in Virginia is the Virginia Literacy Act, because as you look across the country, there are a lot of literacy acts that are happening in a variety of states. The Virginia Literacy Act actually looks at the whole system. It looks at how are teachers becoming teachers and how are they being trained to learn literacy. It looks at our teachers. How are we supporting our teachers? How are we supporting our reading specialists? How are we supporting our schools? How are we supporting our superintendents? How are we supporting families? And it's really that comprehensive approach that we've seen in the states that are choosing that comprehensive approach to move forward. But the Virginia Literacy Act is one of the few acts that puts a large dollar amount behind the training and support of teachers. And it's really exciting to see the level of support in Virginia to do that. At the same time, the Virginia Department of Education has to think about that school and the school division and families. So really excited to have Melissa on board. She is doing a lot of work to build literacy packages, see what literacy packages are available. I know she and Jenna had a preliminary meeting. So there's going to be a lot of family resources. The one thing I will encourage everyone, and I'm not going to write in the chat right now, but I will in a few minutes when we have a break, the hashtag everybody read VA is a new Twitter account geared at families and really is starting to put a lot of Twitter, social media feed out into the atmosphere with great resources, great ideas. And we're really looking forward to think about how some of the things you've shared, Jenna, through the PTA, we can continue to push that out and collaborate and expand. So you're going to see that from the agency first as families is how do we reach and how do we put good resources as a meanie. I have watched my daughter on multiple occasions go to Walmart and buy really terrible resources to teach my grandson to read. And I have thrown them away several times and then brought other things. And I come back and it's like, oh, that's a Walmart thing. I don't want you to use that. Like, not anything bad about Walmart. Walmart's a great place, but maybe not research-based literacy materials. But I know how important it is to make sure our families have good materials and good resources. So that is a primary emphasis of the work we're doing this year. It's a primary emphasis of some of the work Melissa is doing, and really excited to think collaboratively. I know, Jenna, you and I have had a lot of conversations about that. I think when we think about schools, one of the things schools are thinking about are both the how do I read and the practice reading. So there's two pieces to that. And what we really need to be thinking about to support our schools as community members is how do we reinforce with families the importance of sounds, the importance of language, and the importance of practice. So when we think about sounds, a lot of our children who are in those early grades right now did not always have the same sounds opportunities as we've had in the past. Their parents were wearing masks. They didn't go to play dates as much. They didn't have as much engagement. They didn't have as much talk time with other people. That causes challenges with our youngest youth that are learning to read right now. So the more we can encourage families to talk, the more we can encourage them to hear sounds and play with sounds and have those opportunities to do great family things. I think that's really important. And you're going to see a lot of those resources. So encourage us to think about those kinds of opportunities. Also, how do we help families get vocabulary, right? The more we talk to children, the more opportunities we talk, the faster children learn vocabulary. And that's an important second piece that we are going to start leaning into that you're going to see in the Virginia Literacy Act around community resources. And then Jenna, your question was purchasing books. Books. There are no bad books, right? Books are important, letting children read, having children learn to read, having audio opportunities. Those are all great resources and important resources. I think the important thing as you're thinking with classrooms and teachers is thinking through making sure those books are appropriate and making sure you're thinking through how you support the educators and what makes sense in their classrooms and really building a partnership in that space. Because I know the more books they have in their classroom, the more opportunities the kiddos have to read, the more opportunities they have people to read to them. So it's a great opportunity, and being flush with books can never be a bad thing. But making sure the partnership and the thought is there and partnering with educators. I think what you will see in the classroom is part of the work that Emily Solari is leading out of the University of Virginia is reviewing curriculum. And I am really proud of the work she's doing. It's really impressive. They are taking a very deep look at curricular materials. And a lot of times you will see today the science of reading smacked on a bunch of books, right? And it's not necessarily following brain science, but it's calling the material science of reading. Emily Solari and her team really deeply understand the brain science of reading, and they're really doing a good job helping evaluate those materials. So you should see either a validated set of materials in classrooms next year or schools purchasing materials off of those lists that are on our website or in the process of being on our website, moving into classrooms next year. And Jenny, you said, what about standards? So you will see that ELA standards will be approved in March. They will complement the Virginia Literacy Act. So a lot of things that are outdated in our standards around sounds, around practice, those standards are being updated to match the brain science and the expectations in the Virginia Literacy Act. So those will complement each other really well. It won't feel like two separate things. It'll feel like everything's coming together for our educators. And you really, as family members, should see great resources, great materials because of that vetting process, and an opportunity to engage. I call it Sounds First. Very important opportunity to have Sounds First in language development for our students in the youngest grades. So really excited about that. At the same time, we also know that we've got to step up the game in mathematics. Our kiddos need mathematics standards that are challenging, that are rigorous, and that will prepare them over time for those career readiness opportunities that we want our children to all aspire to. That starts with kindergarten, first and second grade. And it is important to move into additional grade levels and making sure that that progression of skills is there. So really excited. We'll see mathematics move. The other thing that you will see from the department is traditionally when we have curriculum and standards move out, it falls a great deal on the school divisions to do that. We have hired we are in the process of hiring 3 specialists that are always out in the field for literacy and 3 specialists that are always out in the field for mathematics. So you're really trying to come alongside of our educators and support them in the actual implementation of those changes. Jenna, I think something popped up in the chat, so I want to make sure that yeah.
I'm going to read it. There's 2 questions in the chat.
Great.
So the first one is, and I almost think we should do a special hashtag that's like Sound First. I think that would be great to go along with some of our reading materials.
Yeah.
So it actually asks, will the Everybody Read VA account be sharing just general parent tips on social media? So it would be an easy place that as PTA leaders, we could reshare those into our PTA social media pages.
Yes. Yep. Okay. Absolutely.
Wonderful. And then the second one, I'm going to read this. I know, Amanda, you always have intricate questions, so I'm going to read the whole thing. The approved VLA literacy curricular list that came out this past summer did not contain any basal curricula for special education students, specifically thinking those in self-contained classrooms who are not mainstreamed during language arts. The list coming out in the next phase is slated to have interventions, but those aren't the same as basal resources. How will the VDOE close this gap to ensure that students have access to appropriate basal materials, not solely interventions?
Yep, totally agree. One thing you saw is a phase and approach because of the number of materials. So what was adopted in the summer was a first wave of materials. There is another wave being reviewed. You'll see a first review in November and a final review in December of another wave and another wave. I think they had over 100 materials that came in over the summer. So you're going to see things to continue to come into waves. We only can review what's submitted to us. So if a publisher has a specific basal for special education, it doesn't come into us, it's not reviewed. I will say evidence-based practice. If you look at structured literacy and some of the things that we need for children who need more repetition and more support, most of the research right now is saying that they need to start with that Sounds First approach, that fluency piece, and that needs to be repetitive. Really strong materials have interventions and supports that are embedded in the core curriculum for all children and give more repetition and more support for our children who might be in self-contained classrooms. So it's not necessarily different basals, it's how do I reinforce those in a way so that all children get the same Sounds First approach, get that same structured literacy instruction, and also have the same language opportunities. There's just more supports for our children in self-contained classrooms. And that's part of the educative piece that needs to come through the training. And it's part of the resources that you're going to see VDOE and the VLP partnership really emphasize with teachers and with reading specialists as we go through the deep part of the training. So we're early in the training phases. We had our reading specialists go through a first 2-day boot camp. That's very early. If I think about what we've done in Tennessee and what Tennessee has done, teachers went through weeks of training and then months of support to really think about what happens in a self-contained classroom, what happens in a core classroom. That's why this is the planning year for the VLA, and the implementation year is next year. So you'll see a lot of training support for our educators, but really we should start with the same set of materials. And as you said, intervention materials are not core curricular materials. I would say that most of the materials being approved are not considered basals anymore. They have a wealth of resources around those. And the instructional materials have multiple pieces, and all those pieces fit together as a core curriculum. I would say that core curriculum should have, and Emily is looking at that, additional supports for kiddos who need more structure, more emphasis, and more practice, which is what you'd want to see in your self-contained classrooms. And we'd want to see, based on evidence-based practice and brain science, happen. So it's not that we want a separate set of materials. We actually want the wraparound pieces in the materials and the training for our special educators. And you will see those things start to come out. We have another wave of training past the reading specialists that will incorporate our special educators, our central office staff, our title staff, and then you'll see something for principals, and then you'll see rollout for teachers. So you're going to see that phase and approach to make sure everybody has the support they need within the system.
Wonderful. And I'll like lead off of Amanda's question and just acknowledge we've had a lot of findings in special education in Virginia. So I wonder if you could speak to some of the work you might be undertaking to improve access to special education services and interventions for our students.
Absolutely. One of the first things that I was able to do and had the opportunity to do was sit down with special situations with our students with disabilities and our students with special needs, and some of the frustrations that families were experiencing across the state. As I was having more and more conversations, and as I was digging in the department, we needed to step back and really step back and have national experts come in and help us think. So we have had two national experts. One is Dr. Rob Pasternak. Rob is a former Undersecretary of Special Education at the U.S. Department of Education. He lives in Virginia Beach, and he does work all across the country thinking about family experiences and thinking about the school to family connection. So he has been evaluating, working on evidence, and we expect to have his report next Friday back to us with recommendations on that side. How are families feeling? How are schools engaging with families? How are we doing that piece? And how are we working together? At the same time, Nathan Levinson, who is a former superintendent, has worked with multiple state agencies on thinking about their internal structures and how the internal structures really support school divisions. He is doing the state to school analysis and evaluation of our programming, and he will also submit a report and recommendations at the end of this month. We will be taking both of those evaluations and recommendations and creating a plan for the Virginia Department of Education with our next steps and our scale up steps around special education based on their comprehensive review. Because what we don't want to do is take one step and then cause 4 downstream problematic impacts. So I wanted to create a complete system evaluation. We are having program evaluation from the U.S. Department of Ed. Their office is called OSEP over the next 6 weeks, but they told us their report wouldn't be ready till March. And I was like, March is a whole nother year for our families, and we can't wait till March. So we hired our 2 experts to give us a really comprehensive analysis. And they did say this is probably the most interviews and the fastest they have reviewed documents, because I said, I really need this now because we need to make moves for our kiddos right now. So we'll have that comprehensive set of feedback and recommendations at the end of this month. I'm really looking forward to that, because then we can work through October to make good plans and make next steps forward.
Wonderful. And I encourage everybody to continue to put your comments in the chat. Amanda just shares often the general education core curriculum is not used in the self-contained classroom. So there's definitely a need to adjust those expectations.
1000% agree.
All right. So as we've returned from COVID, we've seen a lot of students really struggling with school discipline and just behavioral challenges in the classroom. Wonder if you could speak to anything that you might be undertaking to ensure that all of our students have access to a safe learning environment.
Absolutely. So one of the pieces that we are working on in multiple phases is both physical safety and mental health safety, and creating both of those things. So we have a major initiative called Stronger Connections with extensive dollars for school divisions who may not have updated their physical safety. And that's an important space, because if I'm not physically safe, I'm never going to be mentally safe for our educators and our students. So the first wave of work is making sure that all of our school places are physically safe. So there's about, I might misspeak. There's a good amount of dollars. So I'm not going to give the amount of dollars going out to school divisions to really get into that physical safety and make sure we're doing that. We also have the next wave of school improvement grants and school construction grants to continue to work on that. We have partnered with the Right Help Right Now to launch some pretty extensive mental health models, mental health resources, and supports. We also have the legislation on counseling that happened last year that said our counselors should be counseling. And these are the things they can do. These are the things they can't do. I'm really excited about that. We've been working on communications and strategies and support to really help our counselors truly be counselors. But we have to continue to collaborate and be responsive in the field, because what I heard in my tour with superintendents is what students need in Southwest Virginia is different than what students might need in Portsmouth, which is different than what students might need in Winchester. So how do we make sure that we're providing that customized support, and how do we think through that? I know I have a meeting with Secretary Littell and a few others to continue to talk about how we build out menus of resources to make sure it's there. The one thing I will say, Jenna, that I have seen is a lot of our students are disengaging from school where those resources are to support mental health. I cannot speak to how important it is for that student to come to school where the resources are to support them. So a lot of times we are allowing our children who are struggling to stay home, and that feels good, but that actually disconnects our children from the mental health resources that are available in schools. And we need to make sure that they're coming to school so that we can really engage and provide those supports and those resources for our students. So one of the biggest things we can do, and evidence is really showing this across the country, is making sure our kids are coming to school and engaging, because that is the first step to really addressing some of those challenges and needs.
And so on that front of just addressing the chronic absenteeism problem, are there any tips that you would share for our PTAs or for our parents to think about as they're trying to encourage attendance within their school? Obviously, we are, within our PTA space, working hard to create that inclusive and welcoming environment for all of our families and create those important connections to school. But are there any tips that you wanted to share?
Yeah, and I think I just want to throw some stats out there because they are alarming in Virginia. When we look at our data and when we look at our 3rd through 8th grade data, we have 1 in 2 students either at risk or not on grade level. We have 2 in 3 students at risk or not on grade level. And what we're seeing in that data is students with higher absenteeism are more likely to be at risk or not at grade level. So much so that a student who is chronically absent, and that's our fancy education word, right? It means you miss 2 days a month. So 2 days a month is 18 days a year. If a student misses 2 days a month for 18 days a year, they drop their performance by 25% in math and 18% in reading. So it's extremely important that our students are coming to school, because as they drop, they're disengaging and they're widening that gap. So we want to make sure our students are coming to school. And really what I would say, Jenna, is one of the strongest set of resources in the country is Attendance Works. Attendance Works has advocacy packages for families, for PTAs, for a lot of different organizations, and I'm happy to shoot you some of those resources. We just sent some resources out to school districts about engaging and packaging and advocacy that they can do, but it's really important for us to spread the word with families. Kiddos have to come to school every day. The more they stay home, the bigger that gap widens. Even if they're struggling, they're not having the opportunity to get engaged in learning, and so it just creates a habitual cycle. We also want to make sure kiddos have a healthy breakfast. So we're really pushing on working with No Kid Hungry, other agencies, to make sure that kiddos have access to healthy meals in the morning. I think that's a great place for us to be involved, in community partners, to making sure that there's opportunities for kiddos to eat, for them to feel healthy and have a good day at school. And the other thing we want to make sure is that students have a trusted adult at school. When they feel like someone cares about them, they are more likely to come to school. That might not be their classroom teacher. It might be the person who gets them off the bus. It might be their art teacher. It might be their counselor or their principal. But it's really important for us to establish a culture, as you said, Jenna, that is warm and welcoming, but students feel connected to one adult in their classroom or in their school setting every day. It is also important for us to celebrate successes, which is another place that our PTAs can lean in on. Celebrate individual students, classrooms, and schools, because what we celebrate and what we recognize moves the needle, and really bringing our families into those celebrations helps them realize that this is important and that we're all in it together and we're celebrating the movement together. And then last but not least, we're really reaching out to what are the barriers that are causing kiddos not to be able to come to school. We know in our rural areas, sometimes that's transportation. We know in some of our other areas that's families having work schedules that are challenging about getting their kiddos to school. So we really want to think about reducing those barriers and reducing those barriers intentionally. What we know about chronic absenteeism is it's a localized situation. What might work in different settings might not work in other settings. And we really need to think collaboratively with our school divisions and our schools to say, what is the challenge? How do we come to the table and how do we support you? And that's an important place for us to be in the community organizations. I'm really excited that the governor has created a statewide task force, and that statewide task force is really going to be looking at the judicial barriers, the transportation barriers, the pediatric barriers, and really talking about statewide solutions. But those are broad menu solutions that don't necessarily impact every single community. And we really have to work together to support that.
And there's a question here. Do the resources that have been referenced deal with just general school refusal, the attendance works, and just not wanting to attend school and having a serious mental health reaction to physically being in school due to past trauma?
Yeah, there is a wealth of resources. They've done a lot of work in a variety of settings. I think the resources have wide ranges. And of course, there are different spaces where trauma is different, and trauma is definitely a piece of that. And I think one of the most comprehensive models where they've done some studies similar to the trauma is the work that they did in Baltimore. So when you look at attendance works and you look at some of the Baltimore resources, there's some really good resources around mental health.
So I want to bring us back a little bit to the accreditation conversation with how parents can celebrate some of the things happening in their school and just access to parent data. I know that there was a bill that we supported last session that was to improve the access to parent data. In the sense of a parent data backpack, that's something a little bit more portable across the state of Virginia. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the work that you're doing around parents accessing student data, and then also just any improvements that you might be considering to the school quality, the school quality profiles. I was thinking for a minute, the standards of quality, the school quality profiles.
All those words.
Sharing out just the standards for our students and giving our PTAs that space to come and see where there might be academic improvements needed and where we might be having areas that we could celebrate.
I think one of the biggest challenges in Virginia is our data backbone, the way in which we collect student data, the way in which we collect performance data, the way in which we collect teacher data was built in 1999. If you think about the cell phone you had in 1999, and we're running a data system off of a similar set of technologies. So we have to update our technology so we can get better information to anyone. And that is a major systems improvement that we're advocating for through a major budget ask to make sure that we take a 1999 data system and upgrade it to a 2025. And I say 2025 because those upgrades take a serious amount of time to get in place. So I'm very excited about the parent portal task force and the groups of families that are coming together to tell us what they want. But part of the challenge is we don't have a system that allows us to push that data out in a meaningful way. And so a lot of our school divisions have created their own parent information system, and it's not great because they're not pulling data from the department, they're pulling a multitude of data from their own school divisions, and that looks different across the state. So the first thing that we need to do internally at the department is upgrade our 1999 data highways and make them 2025 data highways. And so really excited to have Dave Myers, who is absolutely brilliant, former superintendent, dad of many children who are in the Virginia public school systems, thinking and working nationally to rebuild our data highway so that whatever we take out of the parent portal task force, that parent digital path, digital backpack that you were talking about, Jenna, how we take that, the things that come out of that, we can actually implement those. So one of the biggest challenges is our own backbone, which is the first step for us to update. Second, a lot of the conversations we've been having are making the data easy to understand and use. So one of the things I'm most excited about is the work that Melissa just did with the parent resources that came out with your school quality profiles. You also got student profiles. And so she did an annotation, and you can find that on the website, that tells parents where to go. And now we're working on a series of video resources that talk about that. And then there's another handout that says, okay, this is my report on my student. What questions do I ask of my teacher? And it's a great parent teacher conference. Right now, those are all kind of standalone resources. Our hope is to build a statewide portal on that new digital highway that allows every family member to access those very quickly, access those in multiple languages, and access those for different learners in different places and the different level of questions that might be needed. So we are building that process, but I'm really excited that we have this task force that is coming together and giving us thought partnership, ideas, recommendations, so we can make sure that one, that digital highway can do the things that our parents need, but two, we're thinking about how to build out that backpack portal. So it's not, oh, I go to this website for this handout, I go over here for this handout, I go over here for this document, everything comes together. And there are some states doing really good work. And we've been talking to those states as well. So once we get the information from the work group, once we get that digital highway moving, we can start building this together, because the most important thing for our families, as you said at the onset of this hour, Jenna, is to empower our families and make sure they have those resources. Right now, those resources are loose threads everywhere. We want to package them in a way that is easy to use, clear to use, and helpful for you to really be empowered to work with your school and your teacher to move supports for your child forward. So a lot of work is going on. A lot of layers of work have to go on. So I'm excited that we will be on the other side, hopefully, as we start school next year and really build out good resources for our families in a centralized location.
And I see your question here, Michael. I'm going to come back to it in just a second. I want to come back to something that you were just saying, Dr. Coons, about how a lot of the local school divisions have built out essentially their own assessment models and are giving our kids different testing, right? A lot of the MAP tests. A lot of the families have been very concerned about the excessive testing that's happening for kids.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the work that's ongoing and the changes that have actually already been made to the Virginia Growth Assessment to reduce some of that repetitive testing and really ensure that our parents have access and our students have access, right? That we're empowering our students with information about their own academic performance and changes that we're making to our testing system, our assessments.
Yeah, I think the intent of the Virginia Growth Assessment was to be this really great growth tool that happened 3 times a year that gave information to everyone. But the design of it moved so quickly that they just pulled summative tests, those end of year test questions, and dropped them in, which means all of the testing, security, and protection that has to go around those items turned the Virginia Growth Assessment into mini real end of year tests. And that didn't give a good opportunity to actually have great information for teachers or a collaborative space for teachers. Second, there wasn't a lot of reporting that came out of the Virginia Growth Assessment. So this year we switched up the items a bit so they are more helpful to educators. And we are now in the process of working with Pearson to at least make those reports more clear, at least for educators, because they weren't even clear for educators. Unfortunately, that contract with that vendor, it is written, so we are stuck right now. We are getting ready to launch a new contract and a new contracting process so that we're able to really learn from the Virginia Literacy Act, some of the problems with the Virginia Literacy Act, to move forward and have a better set of resources. That we are in that in-between spot and trying to improve the ship as it's already sailed and trying to get better items, better information, but we are a little bit stuck in the spot where we are. That causes it to feel like there's a whole lot of testing because of the testing security that has to happen in the Virginia Growth Assessment, and then school divisions aren't getting great information from that. So some of them are adding testing on top of that, and that just feels like we're swimming in testing. One of the things we talked a little bit about that accountability system at the onset of this call, and we talked about growth. Originally, the Virginia Growth Assessment was going to measure that growth. Our hope is that growth and achievement can be taken from the end of course and the SOL assessments so that we don't have to layer all these tests on, so that school divisions can make better decisions and pull some of that assessment and that heavy feel off of that. We're hoping that through the vendor contract and the contracting with a new assessment provider and some of the work there, we're going to see movement in the right direction. Unfortunately, that is a slow process. Assessments in education world is not a fast process. We are pushing as fast as we can go, but it is a deep, long process. Jenny, you've been part of the 585 task force where we really looked at assessments and talked about different kinds of assessments, different opportunities for assessments. Really excited that that report's going to come out in the next week or so, that it will allow us to take the recommendations and really move forward so that we can improve that. It's going to take us a year to get into the right space, but I'm excited we are moving in the right direction.
All right, wonderful. And I'll get this last question here. There's a lively discussion at the board meeting last week regarding the issue of grading schools. And we talked about this a little bit at the onset of the call. The 5-star method that Maryland uses, an ADF system in other places, and the placemat model in Indiana, which is the preference of the board members that they were embracing. One board member mentioned that Florida is allowing parents in failing schools the option to move to other schools, giving them a choice of mobility. Is Virginia considering a similar possibility?
So that is code. Choice and those kinds of things would have to go through the legislature, and they would have to be brought up by the legislature. A lot of the conversations around the placemat of Indiana and some of the summative ratings are also regulatory and code driven. So our required law says that we have to give some kind of summative measure to school divisions, which requires stars, something, some other things. I have heard from about 120 superintendents at this point, and there's no one excited about an A through F rating for schools. They are much more interested in stars or some kind of placemat that has an additional summative measure and kind of balancing out the two in those spaces. We also have federal requirements of how we provide school improvement supports and how we provide federal school improvement supports that also requires some kind of summative rating at this point in time. So my hope through public comment and through resources is, what does that placemat and summative rating combination look like as we move forward? And what I've said to superintendents, I will say to you, I will say to everyone as we're talking about this, is please come out to public comment, stakeholder engagement sessions. Please weigh in. Please engage in the conversations. Make sure your voice is heard. Make sure your local PTA voices are heard. Make sure we're having conversation with all stakeholders at the table, because it's important for the state board to hear those conversations and hear what matters to you in that transparency. The only way we're going to have a really great accountability accreditation system is to have tons of voice in the matter. So I'm excited that the board has spent so much time thinking about this, but it's a really great opportunity now that the board is going out into the communities and having the opportunity to have really robust stakeholder engagement over the next 6 to 9 months. And I encourage you to be a part of that conversation and weigh in on those conversations, weigh in on what you want to see as you're looking through that.
Yeah, we will definitely be, I think, coming back to you to have some more conversations about that. I think there's some
Great.
opportunity to bring some of the experts that we've been talking with, even through the parent data portal conversation,
Great.
to really help inform some of the tools and resources that our parents are seeing with respect to that.
Awesome.
There's another question here. I hope new assessments will be more accessible for a wider variety of students. As an example, many students are missed in identification for reading needs because iReady isn't accessible for all students. And then she adds, I'm looking forward to those conversations.
Yeah, well, first, iReady is not a state tool. That is a local division tool. I am really excited about the vowels because it does do a comprehensive approach. It will have more of a capture because it starts with the sounds and the linguistics and goes through comprehension and does that full breadth of reading. So excited that the vowels will have all of that information. That is the state tool. If a school division chooses to use iReady and those things, that should not be in replacement of vowels. Vowels is actually that tool that helps support our kiddos in understanding reading. And it is the diagnostic tool that helps us better understand that. iReady is a vendor produced product that a school division might choose to use, but it's not endorsed by the state because it doesn't do the comprehensive things that vowels does and is supported through the Virginia Literacy Act.
Okay, well, unless there's any other questions, I want to thank you for making time to spend with us this evening and
Absolutely.
sharing thoughts and ideas. Hopefully we can have you back again. We'll share
Absolutely.
the video out with all of our members so they can watch in their bunny slippers casually. And we want to thank you for being here with us today.
Absolutely. Take care.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.